Hey there. Hey, Tisha.
Hey Renee, how you doing?
Pretty good. Look at all the cool people who have come to join us for this webinar. It's so thrilling.
Yes.
So please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat, because we have a great big group of interesting people from all over the country and all over the world, and we're going to use that back channel. Thank you, Felicia from Sells, Arizona, Krista Forster from Houston, Texas. Introduce yourself on the chat and tell us where you're coming from. So, hi, my name is Renee Hobbs, and I'm a professor at the University of Rhode Island, and I founded the Media Education Lab like a long time ago because I recognize the importance of having a community to address the ever-changing nature of media literacy education. Tisha gave this session a title, The Virus of Racism. We're going to have courageous conversations trying to address and respond and denounce the racism that exists in our schools, in our communities, in our teaching practices, and in our lives. I'd like to ask Tisha to introduce herself and to talk a little bit about where you are, Tisha, on this frame, and what caused you to, what inspired you to help organize this session today.
Well, thank you, Renee, and hello, everyone. My name is Tisha Lewis Ellison. I'm an associate professor at the University of Georgia. I'm really, really honored to be here. I've been really asking faculty about the recent killings that have occurred, the racial tensions that are happening as we speak. And I asked, same question of Renee, like, what's going on? How are you using this platform to talk about issues regarding race and what's going on in the world today? As a Black woman who lives with racism on a daily basis, whether I'm in or out of a pandemic, one who faces racism in the society where I live, institutional racism and where I work. I'm really exhausted, and I am tired, and I'm angry for the lack of concern, the lack of care, the lack of respect, and the lack of humanity that's not given to the Black community. And another part of my identity is that I am actually a daughter of a retired police officer. I'm a niece of a retired lieutenant and a family friend of a former chief of police, right? So my hope is that we feel in this space, that we feel comfortable, but also that we feel uncomfortable, and that we feel vulnerable to share how we're going to personally hold ourselves accountable in the spheres of influence in which we find ourselves, in the way that we can amplify our voices and amplify the voices of those who are no longer here anymore, to eliminate this virus of racism. And really, where do we go from here?
Wow, thanks very much. I think that's getting us off to a really great start. One of the things that we wanted to do today was to create a space, like you just said, where we can be uncomfortable and comfortable, where we can express the full range of our emotions, because like many of you, I feel like I have become so, I'm angry, I'm frustrated. I feel like I've been desensitized over the last 30 years of police brutality, and it's just chipped away at my humanity. And so I do feel like kind of happy to see the protests and the actions that are sort of beginning to say, absolutely, we have to do something. It can't go on any longer. So we thought that maybe the first activity that we'd like to do with you is the famous mood meter. Protests have left me feeling a little bit exhilarated and a little bit inspired. But at the same time, I have really been repulsed and disgusted by the white nationalist backlash, by the obliviousness of our political leaders. And so it's really a complex set of emotions that I'm experiencing.
I mean, I'm angry, I'm exhausted, I'm tired, I'm enraged. There's a little sense of empowerment, because I think that watching the protests and actually seeing how people, younger people are carrying people from various diverse backgrounds, which I've never really seen a wide number. In Melbourne, Australia, the protests were going on in London. I mean, like, this is hitting us globally. And so, you know, there's just a sense of pride in that form. But then there's so many other different ways in which we can protest, you know, to amplify. It's all about, for me, it's about amplifying our voices and being so uncomfortable that it just makes us want to like cringe, but we have to talk about it. And someone told me that, I have to say this, like, someone actually told me that, you know, until white people get really upset, that this is when some change is going to occur. And we're noticing that now. I don't know what happened the other years prior to this. Yeah, I mean, because this has been going on for quite a long time.
Yep, boy, such a great observation. So we're going to invite folks in the room now. Raise your hand and we'll hear from 5 of you. What's the range of emotions that you've been feeling? Who wants to share? Ariel, you're first.
Hi, everyone. What encourages me is the fact that people are out protesting. I'm concerned for the safety of everyone. Obviously, we're in the middle of the pandemic. Absolutely, this is what's needed. And I have mixed feelings about wanting to be out there. I've been on previous protests in regards to gun violence. That was way before the pandemic. And I'm also just, I'm hopeful because I do see some change happening. It's a long journey. I was happy to listen to former President Obama speak recently and say that this does not happen from today to tomorrow.
Thank you for sharing. Bina, in the chat, you put something really powerful. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
About which, and it's pronounced Bina, just so you know.
Bina. Thank you, Bina.
And which comment was it that you were thinking of?
Talk to us about your feeling words. One of the comments.
I said nervous, excited, and concerned. And I don't really know how to put it all together. I am very excited to see people really coming out and standing up for what is right, which is that all people should be treated equally. That I'm concerned about the idea of just getting rid of all the police everywhere, which some places are trying to do. So I do think there needs to be some kind of way to retrain and do sensitivity training and all that for the people who already are in the police departments. I guess I'm just nervous because, as somebody else commented, we have a white nationalist for a president. And so, he sets a tone and brings out some of the uglier side of things in our country. And that makes me very nervous. And, he has a way of sort of pointing the finger everywhere else except at himself and his followers. So,
Thank you for sharing. Yeah.
Yeah, so sorry. If that
No,
went
that,
on
that was great. If you're on video right now, give me a big hands up and I will call on you. We're going to hear from 3 more people. We're trying to flesh out the full range of emotions that people are experiencing, people are feeling. Maddie.
Hi, Renee. Hi, everybody. How are you? Yesterday, I became an ambassador for mental health in New York. I went to a training because I wanted to do something. I was upset and I was angry. And one of the things that came out of that training is they asked what we're going to do in education in New York. And I said, we have to change the curriculum. We have to change the curriculum for mental health and, more importantly, for how children are treated, what goes on at home that we don't hear about, and all the range of emotion. And the truth of the matter is we are going to have to develop something in media literacy as well because of film and television. So I'm hoping as a collective group in media literacy that we will do that. But I'm very thankful because I decided that sitting back wasn't going to do anything anymore. So
Wow.
I'm hoping everyone here together, I'm very happy about this.
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing. We're trying to flesh out all the emotions. Who wants to share? I'll hear from 2 more people. Marta from Puerto Rico.
Hi, everyone. You might think that we here don't get so much of it because we are away from United States, but we get contagious very easily. Here, everything gets replicated. And thanks to all the protests that we've been watching on the news and everything, people have gotten the courage to come out and say things that are happening to them. For example, recently, if you look in the papers, in the news, there was this couple that just moved into a building, and he's black and she's white, and the neighbor started to put in huge posters in front of her house, drawing, you know, black silhouettes and putting the word FO, which means stinks. We say in Spanish, fo. And so she started with one, and then she started with many, putting all over around her house and putting the music really loud to scare them and, you know, make them move away from that area. And as soon as this big protest started in the United States, he came out on the TV and started, you know, telling the woman, and so on. A lot of other people came out saying things about experiences they were having at work and so forth. So in a way, like Renee said, you know, there's you know, one part that is really bad, and there's another one that is really lifting up, you know, and letting people come out and talk and speak out. So I just wanted to say that.
Storytelling is part of the way we understand this reality, right? So thank you so much. We'll hear from 1 more person. Share a feeling and experienced. Who's next? Anne.
Hi, Renee. Thank you.
Uh-oh, Anne, what happened to your video?
The faculty advisor at UR.
Anne, I'm sorry to say you're...
I don't know. It says that it didn't stop.
Oh, okay.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes, now
Okay.
you're rolling. Go ahead.
Oh, I don't know what happened. A motorcycle went by, so I don't know. I'm outdoors. But as the faculty advisor for Amnesty International, the students, I sent them the petition to sign, reaching out to the Minnesota law enforcement, Minnesota leaders at the very early stages when Amnesty International, the human rights global movement, took this on. And I was really heartened by the students' response. They wanted to go to the rally, they wanted to rise up, they wanted to have their voices heard, so we did. We took a good group of about 10 students of URI to the Providence rally. So I can say that I'm like cautiously hopeful because I see that there is a good cross-section of ages, of races, of backgrounds, of people really enraged, as we should be. And it's finally time to act. So I'm just hoping, really, it's cautious because I hope that we don't oversimplify and we just begin to listen to the realities of our Black brothers and sisters in this country, the realities. Many of my friends have brought up Black boys in this country, and it's totally different. So just acknowledging this, I have hope, but it's also very cautious hope.
Thank you so much for sharing. We're going to break you into breakout groups now. And in those breakout groups, we've got some tasks that we think it would be cool for you to do. Hold on just a second, and I will describe the breakout room process, because really we want to have some in-depth conversations where you can share your experiences, your feelings, your thoughts, and your actions. So the project that we're going to do looks something like this. We're going to ask you to work in small group breakout rooms to briefly introduce yourselves, personally address one or more of the questions below, and notice key insights and ideas from others. These are the 4 framing questions that we'd like to use for our discussion groups. The first is identity. How does my race influence who I am? The second is justice. What kinds of bias and privilege do individuals and groups experience because of race? The third is diversity. How are my experiences similar and different from those of people from other racial backgrounds? And the fourth is action. What can I do to address racial prejudice and advocate for racial justice? So we're going to ask that you work for about 20 minutes as you discuss those 4 questions, the questions that are most meaningful to you, the stories you most want to tell, the feelings you most want to express. We're going to ask that you continue to discuss as you create. Because one thing we know about media literacy folks is they take a broad look at things. Your conversation is going to range across the racism in law enforcement, the racism in schools, and the racism in media and society. So we'd like you, as you work, to create a slide to represent how members of your group, the 6 or 7 of you who are gathered in the small group, what you're contemplating, what current action you're taking, or what future action you're considering to address the virus of racism. And so we've put a bunch of blank slides, you can see at the bottom here, a bunch of blank slides for you and your team to kind of claim as maybe you'll just use it to take notes, or maybe you'll put up some pictures or words. But that's the process that we're going to use for about 20 minutes. And now one tactic we always use in before we break into our small group breakout rooms, is we like to ask you to put a thumb up in the air if you understand the activity that we're going to be doing in the breakout rooms. Thumbs up if you understand the activity that we're going to be doing in the breakout rooms. If you have questions, you can put those questions in the chat. Before I let you go, though, I want to make sure that you can all access the slide deck so that you can review the questions that we ask. So please give me a thumbs up when you can access this, let's see here, when you can access this Google slide deck. Go to the chat room, open up that link, and give me a thumbs up when you have opened up that Google slide deck. It looks like people are getting ready. We're going to break you up into, get this, you guys, 14 breakout rooms.
Oh my God.
We're going to talk for 20 minutes. And when we come back, we're going to have a synthesis conversation. It should be wild. It should be wonderful, but you should have a chance to really listen and really share with some people who care about this topic as much as you do. Okay, I'm breaking you up into groups. Have fun, learn something, and make a new friend. Now you should be seeing a message saying that the breakout rooms are open. Click on the link to join the breakout room. All right, so I wonder which of these questions you guys want to talk about first. Identity, justice, diversity, or action? I'm going to share my screen with you here. Put those questions up on the one. I, of course, really want to talk about identity because I am definitely aware how my race influences the many privileges that I have had in my life. And I am increasingly aware of the way in which I have never had to be afraid of the police. I have never, until only one experience in my whole life, did I ever feel threatened by police. And I realized that that is due to my white privilege. And I now have a appreciation, I feel, having had one bad experience with the police, I feel like I feel like I never thought, if you would have asked me 10 years ago, would I be in favor of defunding the police? I don't think I could even have imagined it. But now I feel like that is the solution, right? Because the culture of policing has gotten out of control, and and I've been oblivious to it because of my whiteness, right? I've been able to dismiss it or marginalize it or set it aside, like what I thought Tisha said really beautifully, which is like, you know, why are we paying attention to now when we've ignored it for so long? But I'm aware that my privilege is part of the problem right now. So that's my thought on that. What about you? Which of these questions do you want to reflect on, analyze, think about?
Well, let's continue with identity, maybe.
Yeah. Say more about it, Vanessa.
Okay. Well, when I was in graduate school, one of my mentors asked the question, a professor asked the question, what would a generation of African Americans have written about, talked about, acted out in terms of theater? What would have been our go-to theme if slavery had not happened, if discrimination and racism did not exist? And we all sat in it was a seminar class, just about 10 people. We sat there speechless. So what I'm saying is, it's not so much race as in a biological factor that defines me. It's the experience. It's the experience. Being African American is so deeply, intricately connected to being oppressed. What would I have talked about? What would I think about on a daily basis if I had not experienced oppression? I don't know. Because that defines so much, and it's kind of a sad reality. But who would James Baldwin who would he have been? Who would Langston Hughes have been? What would they have written about? What kind of music would have come out of the African American community if we had not had that oppression? So personally, I am African American. I am female. I do define myself by gender in the traditional sense. And I'm a mother, I'm a wife, I'm a sister. I'm all these things that help to define my personality. But somewhere very close to the center of who I am is someone who fights passionately against oppression.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
You're also a mentor and a teacher and my inspiration, Vanessa.
And I have now colonized, because Vanessa, that was so powerful. I've now colonized. I've now colonized slide 13 with this phrase. identity rooted in the fight against oppression.
Yes.
It was almost like what I sense is like this was not negotiable.
It's not negotiable. We don't know how to think outside that frame. And it, you know, and it has, you know, suffering always produces these deep kinds of character traits, you know, long suffering. And I mean, that's at the heart of the Christian faith and all of those things. But so it has produced this kind of depth and beauty of soul that comes out of the African American community. That's undeniable.
Yeah.
But it's a
crappy way
tragic,
for it
yes.
to happen.
Yes. Can't we get depth some other way?
Yeah, really. Yeah. It's not something you would wish on your best friend
didn't
in
sign
the
up
sense
for.
of to experience that suffering, and then also to see your children experience it, your grandchildren experience it.
I don't want to be the only voice here. I'm going to say this, and I promise I'm going to shut up. But on the day that George Floyd died, I answered all of my emails signed, "What should I tell my sons who are Black?" That's how I signed my emails. I finally stopped after about a week of that, saying, "Okay, you know, let's get back to maybe a little bit normal." So it's just so deeply interwoven. But I want to hear from my colleagues here.
Who's next? Maddie, Ashley, Ann?
You ready, Renee? This is difficult, but I'm going to say it anyway. Many people have been carefully taught, and what they're taught in school and what they're taught at home are completely diverse. And I'm very worried because I have a niece and nephew under 2. And like, oh my goodness, when they go to school, what are they going to deal with? And as an educator, and as an administrator, as someone in the media literacy field, we have to do something. We have to teach it better. We have to change the curriculum. And I've been listening a lot lately to different people, things that they wouldn't say in certain locations. And I'm sitting there shaking my head saying, do I know you? Do I want to know you? And I have a cousin who is married to an African-American woman who I love as my cousin. And people have stared at me because I've embraced my cousin. That took a lot out of me. So we're going to do everything we can, whether it's whatever media literacy organization I'm involved with, including Renee's, what I do with Gina Davis, and we're going to bring that up at our meeting. That's coming up soon. But we need to do, because they are carefully taught, and that, you know, that song.
Yeah.
And you need to unteach that somehow. So I've got a lot going on in my head. I don't know how we're going to do it, but together we will. We must.
Ashley, Ann, which of those questions are meaningful to you? Identity, justice? What actions, and how do you face the challenges of the place we're at right now in your family, in your community?
Well, justice was a big theme at our school this year. We did our last summer, we read Just Mercy as our all-school read for our high school. And we centered like the first several weeks of school around that. We'd had an incident the year before for an exchange student using the N-word in a promposal. It made national news. And we kind of shut down our last week of instruction, because that's how late in the school year it happened, and kind of redesigned all of our curriculum to address the issue and the history of the N-word and like the history of systemic racism, which is something that we've been trying to work on our school for some time, but so that was kind of at the end of last year, and then this year we really focused on the themes of justice, and using that book as our anchor text. In terms of identity, I'd say like right now what's going on in the police, what's been kind of interesting for me to kind of reflect back on, having been, you know, I've been dating my boyfriend for well over 20 years. He's Mexican. And I feel like oftentimes when he drives through a certain town from his house to my house, I'm always kind of like, well, make sure you're not on your phone, or like I feel like I'm always kind of just being like overly protective of what he's doing while he's driving, because that town particularly has and even also the town where I work in, like if you look at anybody who's pulled over, they're never white. But instead of like, and you know, I have the privilege of not having to think about those things the way that he has to think about them. But in terms of like always having thought about it in the thing of, I want to keep him safe, I want to keep him having to deal like away from the nightmare of being pulled over for nothing and all of that stuff. Like, I guess I never really looked at it as in terms of how do we stop that? Like, how do we take that out of the system of the police, rather than like, how do we just avoid it, you know? And I think that that's where we are right now, or at least where I am thinking in a new way, in terms of how do we systematically end that, rather than just like trying to like skirt it and avoid it.
That is a really great observation. And I feel like I am also in that place. I think I didn't really understand the idea of systematic racism. I think I had always treated it at the relational level or interpersonally, like, you know, people who have prejudice. But now I feel like, okay, this is a structural thing, right? And now we're starting to see the whole long list of unaccountability that allows the police to kill somebody over a $20 bill or a cigarette, right? And I feel like the systematic racism needs structural solutions. And I think, why does policing have to be so big? Why does incarceration have to be so big in this country, right? So I feel like we've just ignored that gigantic increase in guns and law enforcement and punishment. And it's like, it's become the structure that's now like enabling racism to flourish. Anne.
Yes, I see that Angelica and Sandra are also in our group. Are they're welcome to speak as well. I don't know if there's a box.
Video's not up.
Are they there? Are you there?
And Angelica and Sandra are
see
listening on the phone, perhaps.
I was gonna say, I see Angelica wrote in the chat, so perhaps she doesn't have mic.
Could you read what she said in the chat?
So far, she's just said hello.
We're glad you're here, Sandra and Angelica. It's cool to participate in whatever level.
I'm here, I'm listening. Okay.
Nice. So we just have one more minute remaining. And of course, I've been playing with slide 13, and it's got a bunch of unfinished sentences. So it's not very good.
I think we're coming to a good closure, I think, Renee, in some ways, because I think that I was just going to say, in my identity, I identify with Italian Americans, and we were always denied speaking Italian in the public. And I was brought up in a Black neighborhood by many of the neighbors of my grandparents, so I always felt very at home in Black communities. So always had just a huge level of comfort with Black communities, and felt a part of those communities, have worshiped in Black churches all through my life. So, but I have what my kids call an overactive justice gene. And I think that just propels me to action all the time,
Wow.
wanting things to change and taking action. And when you were talking, Ashley, I think your name is, about looking at people pulled over, I always want to stop. And I wish so much we would have a movement where if you see somebody pulled over and you think something's going on and you see it's someone of color, or you think that it might be, why don't we all just stop and be witnesses and just peacefully stand by? I don't know. I just had this vision of wanting to stop, or having a movement of stopping. I also want to be cautious about just one or two pills to improve the whole situation. You know, I mean, the police are totally militarized. They get a lot of their equipment from the military. It's just part of that whole military industrial mess that we're in right now. It's very complicated. So solutions have to be nuanced. I've worked many years with Oxfam and other organizations that work on structural change. And it does take a lot of shifting of public opinion. And I think we're at a critical movement now, shifting critical public opinion so that policies and practices can change.
Slides. Let me just ask 2 or 3 people to make a comment on something that came up in your room that was interesting or important to you. Who wants to go first? You could just turn your microphone on and talk. Or you can shout out.
Hey,
Hey.
Kathy Resnicek here. We were in room 3. We had a really great diversity of folks in the room, and it was nice to be able to, I think, I'm speaking for myself, but I got the sense that I think people felt good about being able to be honest about the struggles that we're having. And, you know, as someone who is, although I do suffer from the stigma of being a female, I'm actually, you know, pretty white and middle class and all those things. So some of us were saying, you know, it's hard. How do we talk about diversity, and how do we have these conversations when and challenge some of our students, especially our white students, when, you know, we have the authority to come at that conversation from that.
Wow.
But also someone else in our group had some other challenges. She has a disability, and so does that make her efforts to continue pushing for advocacy and rights of people with disabilities less important now because, you know, people aren't being strangled and murdered? You know, so where do we all kind of come in on our authority, I think, to have these conversations?
Thank you so much for sharing.
I hope I wrapped that up well, group 3.
That was beautiful. Who's next?
I think I'd like to go next. Celia, I teach at a public school, public middle school, and I'd like to say that, you know, we, as a public school teacher, we're given so much training in so many different areas, bloodborne illnesses, bullying, et cetera, et cetera. I think that so many people have expressed that they don't know what to say or don't know what to do when something comes up in a classroom, no matter what the age is. I think that training for all of us would be extremely, extremely helpful.
Thank you for sharing. Thumbs up on anybody else who feels like they would really, now they're ready to learn in a way, right? Now we're ready to learn, right? Yeah, we feel the gap. We feel the need. I've been reading up a storm, authors I hadn't read before. I'm reading this week of Ruha Benjamin on race after technology, because I realize this is a whole swath of topic that I have to know more about. What other topics came up in your discussion? Who wants to share? Sherry.
I shared that one of the things that's been a little bit of an aha for me, right? Really trying to reflect, because these are issues that have been important. I would have said to you, these are issues that have been important to me for a long time, and I've tried to act in them. But now I think I haven't done nearly enough. And that one of the things I'm realizing is how I've been able to get very incensed. I'm very committed and very emotional, and then walk away. And that I'm realizing that, right, that's a white privilege stance that I hadn't really thought deeply about, that I have the ability to say, I'm mad about it today, and tomorrow I'm not going to think about it. Or not even intentionally say that, but just be able to do that, and that you know, Black people have not been able to do that. That's not part of life, and that takes a real the mental toll that it takes to live in a state of continued agitation and fear and whatever other emotions they're feeling every minute of every day. And I don't have to live that way. And it's really made me think about the mental toll that it takes.
Thank you so much for sharing. What's another idea, topic, or exploration? Sarah.
Yeah, I just wanted to connect with what Sherry was just talking about, because I've just been thinking about, you know, the MLK's speeches and writings about the dangers of the white liberal, right? And so I think it's easy for us to point to Trump and Trump supporters and talk about how racist they are, right? But I think it's our responsibility to look inward and ask ourselves, what's the work that I need to do, including things that might make us uncomfortable at first sight, right? So I'm learning more about the history of policing in the US, right? And the relationships between KKK and policing in the South, and trying to better understand those movements and those abolitionist movements around divesting. So I think in some of the work with that I mentioned in the group before, through showing up for racial justice, I think there does seem to be, especially among white folks, a kind of trepidation around that idea, and a lack of understanding of where it comes from and what it actually means. And so I think when we have those feelings of, you know, wow, this makes me kind of uncomfortable, that might be too radical, I think that's a sign to me and to us to say, that's where I need to do some learning, right? As opposed to saying, yeah, that's a step too far. Instead, to ask of ourselves, you know, maybe I need to do some reading and learning around that and find out more about what that idea means and be open to those things. So, and I wrote in the chat before about Amy Cooper as being such like a timely co-occurrence with the murder of George Floyd, because essentially that's what she was calling for in that 911 call to the police on Christian Cooper when he asked her to put her dog on a leash in Central Park. I mean, she was issuing a death sentence, and I think she knew that in the way that she said it. So just implicating ourselves and thinking and asking those difficult questions of ourselves is really important work that Sherry mentioned. Thanks.
Thanks for sharing. Jennifer, I see your hand is raised.
I think also with learning, one word that struck me in my group and someone was talking about is this idea of unlearning. I think there's a lot that we have been taught to do and ignore, and false information or just neglect of certain histories. And so there needs to be conscious unlearning about certain things to then relearn how to properly teach that information, just to keep that succinct. That's actually a word that we kind of just put in big bold letters on our slide to think about moving forward.
Thanks for sharing. What other ideas came up in your discussion? I see Anne.
I just wanted to share that strength and depth coming from oppression that Vanessa shared. It's so important. And I think the more we can be aware of this depth and this strength of Black communities in the US, the more we can empathize and be allies, true allies for this cause.
Thank you so much for sharing. There's a really interesting dialogue going on in the chat room, but I'll hear from two other people before I let Tisha have the last word, especially if you're a person who hasn't yet participated in our dialogue so far. That's an idea. Thanks, Jessica.
One of my group members, you know, it was really great because he brought up the fact that if you're in a classroom and, you know, maybe your content is a little more difficult to like talk about this, like a math, science, phys ed kind of class, you can kind of pose the question of like, which groups of people get to be a part of which things? Like, for example, social media, right? Who gets to be a part of social media? just about almost everyone, right? But then when you start talking about like academics and scholarly articles, who gets to be a part of those institutions? And then that's when you can kind of, you know, think about that. And even phys ed, like who gets to be a part of the, you know, the sports, but like the management of the sports, you know, institutions.
Right. Thank you so much for sharing. Who's next? Ideas that came up from your dialogue that were meaningful to you. Lynn, I see your hand is raised.
Hi, Renee. So I heard a thirst for training and knowledge. And as allies, I would suggest power in numbers, that you go back to your schools or your institutions and together, 3, 5, 6 of you demand more training, that you don't go it alone. So we all have to educate ourselves together. So that's, I think, a good suggestion from all of ours, for all of us.
Great point. What ideas came up in your dialogue that you want to share? Or what ideas are you thinking about that are important to you now as we come into our last few minutes? Chuck, and then Lisa.
I think in my background as a social studies teacher, you know, there's a lot of talk with the social studies teachers about rethinking our curriculum. And while we've been pushing to make it more and more inclusive and to include a lot more things, but especially at this time to really make sure that we are truly doing that and we're using the primary documents and we're approaching it in such a way where it is meaningful and can spark this important dialogue in our class, but in a way where it's safe to have that dialogue.
Yeah, great point. Lisa.
Oh, I guess I'm the only Lisa. We were just talking about how to address some of these issues in a classroom where we're not dealing with that particular subject matter. So one of the things that I was thinking about was just being very honest about it and being very open about it, and just introducing the subject, because especially with younger kids, they pick up on stuff if you're trying to change the subject. And so starting from that and really being honest about it and admitting that you're maybe not in a comfortable place is really helpful.
It's going to take courage. Joanna. Put your microphone on, girl.
I'm not used to Zoom on my iPad. A big part of what I wonder about is how to begin to recognize what it is that I do and we all do in our teaching that we don't realize. Because it's not easy, but it's relatively easy to be conscious and to talk about things openly. But I think there's so many things that kids see, particularly kids of color, that their teachers, including me, often don't. I was recently made aware by something a student said about a colleague passing over a table of white girls talking to go talk to the table of black girls who are also talking in their class on a regular basis. And I know this person to be someone who tries to think consciously. And I kind of wonder how I handle finding out that stuff for myself and how I handle talking to colleagues about it. Because, yeah, and so do you ask your students to tell you if you do those things? And if you do, you know, how do you find the balance of honesty and control and whatever else you need to do to manage a classroom? I just think it's an interesting, long and complicated conversation.
And that was an absolutely powerful reflection, Joanna. Thank you so much for sharing it. Tisha, I'm going to turn it over to you to make some reflections on what you noticed in your small group and what you heard in our large group synthesis.
Yeah, I want to first of all thank everyone for the comments and reflections. Clearly, we are just starting these courageous conversations in the next 3 minutes that we have on this Zoom. But one thing that Sarah said from New Zealand is that many of you all have mentioned Robin DiAngelo's book, White Fragility. I think that's great. My copy is right here, and I will be reading that. But I want us to also think about, and Sarah mentioned this too, about the other Black scholars who've been doing this work forever, that we also need to tap into. And someone had mentioned in our group that they really wanted to, they think that they've done a great job, but they also felt a little bit of guilt. And so I want to mention like David Kirkland's book, and A Search Past Silence, about the literacy practices of Black boys, right? Bertina Love, we want to do more than just survive, right? She talks about abolitionist teaching. I'm actually reading that this summer. And then going back to Bell Hooks, Teaching to Transgress. Marcel Haddock's Cultivating Racial and Linguistic Diversity in Literacy Teaching Education. Marcel Haddock was the president of the Literacy Research Association. Also getting back to critical race theory, right? And really finding out about those tenets, if you will, that make up what we're talking about right now, is just racism, and how it, talk about the history of that as well. And also Stamped by Jason Reynolds and is it Ibram Kendi, which has gone viral since this whole these racial tensions and injustices that have been happening, and these killings that have been happening, called their book is called Stamped, Racism, Anti-Racism, and You. And so I hope that you can write down those titles of those books, but also go back to folk even like James Baldwin, Patricia Hill Collins, and the women back in the day who've been fighting for this, Kimberly Crenshaw and intersectionality. I think it's really important to really go back to the Black scholars who've been focusing on this work. And I think that you'll begin to find the answer to unlearning and also deprogramming what you've learned in the past.
Thank you so much for sharing. This has been a courageous conversation, and you who have chosen to participate in this webinar realize that together we are part of the solution. So let's give ourselves a round of applause, and to Tisha Lewis Ellison for helping inspire our session today. So thank you so much. We're going to put together the list of books and resources that Tisha talked about, plus a recording of this video. Stay tuned to the Media Education Lab for more courageous conversations. Thanks for joining us today. Let's say goodbye now. Wave goodbye now. Yeah. Thanks for joining us.
Bye. Thank you.
See you next time. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.